Here's a question to think about. How many African American teachers did you have throughout your years in the education system? Got the number? When I asked myself this question, the answer was 0. People of white color have benefited in the education system for many years. In 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was established with its main purpose aiming towards helping freedmen become self-sufficient. The black schools were set up under the direction of this act. This was one of the first attempts at getting African Americans into the education system. Not long after the Black Codes, which put severe restrictions on freedmen, were passed by President Andrew Johnson. This is when the nation saw many African American teachers step up to educate African American students because of segregation. Many African Americans were not happy with the segregation taking place, so multiple cases of segregation in the school system were reported. Once the issue was notable not only in the South but all across the nation, the case of Brown v. Board of Education was taken to court. In 1954, this act was passed, which concluded that racial segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Law of the 14th Amendment. Of course, this was one of the best things to happen to our nation. But when we look at the education system closely, was this helping African American educators or hurting them? Lash and Radcliffe stated, after the decision was made and schools were integrated in the U.S., many African American educators were displaced, demoted, and dismissed from their careers as they knew them. They were often lost in the education system and had little to no control over the progression and development of their careers. Lash and Radcliffe also stated that African American educators faced many challenges after Brown. The 3 most important issues were the closing of many previously all-black schools, the failure to replace African American teachers who were retired, and the demotion of African American principals and administrative personnel. Believe it or not, we still see this happening in our education system today. Chicago public schools have been struggling with this reform since 1987. Here we see Chicago public schools running into the same issues that African American educators ran into after Brown v. Board of Education was passed. Today, Chicago public schools are seeing a decrease in black teachers and an increase in white teachers. 15 years ago, 40% of the Chicago public schools consisted of black educators. Today, the number is almost half of that, at 23%. More white, less experienced teachers are being hired to teach in a school system with predominantly African American students. The numbers of schools with black teachers has gone from 10 to 50. In turnaround schools, we see the same issues that happened when Brown v. Board of Education was implemented. In these schools, all staff are laid off and asked to reapply for their jobs. According to Maureen Keller, prior to the changes, more than 2/3 of teachers in the 32 turnaround schools were African American. African American educators are being laid off and white teachers are being hired to take their place. According to research, the Chicago Teachers Union has filed 2 federal lawsuits charging the district for discriminating against African American teachers in 2011 and 2012 layoffs. Currently, there are 2 Chicago-based nonprofit organizations that are working to increase the rank of teachers who come from a low-income minority community. The 2 organizations are called Grow Your Own Teachers and Golden Apple Scholars. Keller mentioned that Grow Your Own has 108 graduates, 90% of whom are people of color, and 46 who are working in CPS. And as of 2013, the Golden Apple Foundation had brought 600 teachers into CPS over 25 years through its Golden Apple Scholars program. It is clear that a lot needs to be done in order to change this oppression. To begin, CPS needs to stop shutting down schools and focusing on fixing the ones that need help. Many schools have closed in the past couple of years, primarily in low-income Black and Latino areas. Much funding for CPS comes from local funding. Because of this, schools in higher income areas are receiving more money to fund their schools. Much of the other funding comes from state and federal funding. In this case, I believe that state and federal funding should start going towards the schools that actually need it. Schools in low-income areas have less resources to help their students, which is why many of these schools aren't meeting government standards. These are the schools that are being shut down. This is the reason that many African American educators are being laid off and being forced to leave CPS. African American and Latino teachers are an important part of the education system, especially in these low-income areas. We need teachers who can relate to the students and connect with them on a different level. Shutting down these schools is forcing these students into schools where they don't feel comfortable or like they belong, and it's only going to encourage them from showing up to school. It is very clear that Chicago public schools need fixing, and a lot of the problem comes from funding. Shutting down schools is not the answer to the problem that we are seeing. Keeping these schools open and giving them the resources and teachers that they need to succeed is the answer.
Free created using Powtoon.